NBA2K.
So amazing, undefeated, who could see him, who could beat him?
And so, it finally happened. After 52 long, gruesome years, the curse was lifted on Cleveland as the Cavaliers brought home the NBA title with one of the most perfect storybook endings you'll ever see in sports. They had a shot at it last year too. However, as has been the case many times in LeBron's career, he simply didn't have the necessary help in 2015 to get it done. This time, simply having Kyrie Irving made all the difference, which brings us to the topic of this video, proper help for LeBron. Let's rewind the clock back to a time when LeBron was still putting up with subpar rosters every year, the best example of this being when they made the finals in 2007. The 07 Cavs are widely known as one of the worst NBA rosters to make an NBA Finals. No matter how you slice it, they're basically in the top 2 in that debate. The roster was boasting a 22-year-old LeBron James surrounded by some of the NBA's most mediocre talent. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to call this a prime LeBron, as he was extremely young and his game was still missing a lot of things like a refined post game and a reliable jump shot, both of which he added in later years. Nonetheless, LeBron was able to put up the incredible stat line of 27 points per game, nearly 7 rebounds a game, 6 assists, and almost 2 steals. Not to mention he did this all on 47% field goal shooting. I think we fail to realize sometimes how amazing these stats are, considering LeBron was the only star in that team and literally all the pressure was on him night in and night out. This specific roster without LeBron probably wouldn't have even cracked 15 games for the season. Speaking of the roster, LeBron's next best scorer, Larry Hughes, who was only able to put up a mere 15 points per game on 40% shooting. The rest of the roster was filled out with nothing more than players who were good at defending, and they were actually pretty great in that respect. In that season, they ranked 5th in opposing points per game at 92.9 PPG, meaning other teams were struggling to score against them. However, just as you can't only rely on offense to win a championship, you really can't just play defense and win one either. The Cavs ranked 24th in field goal percentage for that year, mainly because nobody else on that roster could consistently score at a high level. This became wildly apparent in the 07 Eastern Conference Finals against the Detroit Pistons, when in a pivotal Game 5, LeBron James scored the Cavaliers' final 25 points and 29 of their last 30, and all of that carried the Cavs to a mere 2-point victory in double overtime. It was eventually enough to get the Cavs to the finals, where the LeBron carrying act would finally collapse, as there was just no way humanly possible he was going to be able to use Larry Hughes or Daniel Gibson to compete against the likes of Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and whoever else the Spurs had that time. As if you needed any more facts to attest to how bare bones average this Cavs roster was, they were 19th in points per game, 20th in blocks per game, 15th in assists per game, and 29th in free throw percentage, almost dead last. So it's nothing short of amazing that LeBron was able to achieve what he did with this specific roster. Despite the poor roster, he was able to win multiple MVPs in his time there. The Cavs were consistently atop the Eastern Conference, and what most people forget, they came into a couple of those seasons as the favorites to win the title, which is kinda unbelievable looking at it in hindsight. But you have to wonder, what if LeBron was ever able to land at least one other superstar to help him out in his first stint with Cleveland? Do you all remember the godlike stat lines he was boasting? What if teams had to figure out how to stop him and another superstar threat back then? It might have been almost impossible to do, much like it has been these last few years. There were a few instances where Cleveland nearly landed that second star. In 2005, they nearly landed Michael Redd, who some of you may not even remember. He was a dynamite scorer and would have been a nightmare to game plan for with LeBron, but he ended up re-signing with the Bucks. Also in 2005, Ray Allen was being wooed by LeBron to come play there, but he too decided to stay put. We did later get to see Ray Allen with LeBron, but he was much older. Imagine having to deal with a young LeBron penetrating and collapsing the D with a wide open young Ray Allen, who was still good for at least 25 points per game at that time. Because the Cavs couldn't lure these guys away, they were stuck with settling for Larry Hughes, but there was one more time a nightmare for the NBA almost happened. In 2010, when the Cavaliers were again looking like favorites to come out of the East, near the trade deadline, they almost made a deal for Morris Stoudemire. And this is the guy before all the knee injuries who was one of the best big men in the league. There's absolutely no question that if the Cavs were able to get him at the time, we would have been seeing the Kobe LeBron finals we all wanted. And boy would that have been amazing with both players having an adequate supporting cast. However, depending on which story you believe, the Cavs chose Antoine Jamison over Stoudemire. There is one story of the version that says the Suns simply rejected the final offer from the Cavs, which included a package of Zydrunas Ilgauskas, J.J. Hickson, and a first-round pick. However, there is another story that Danny Ferry, the Cavs GM at the time, simply didn't want to part ways with J.J. Hickson, who actually was doing some pretty good things, which absolutely nobody remembers since he's been a ghost in the league ever since. But his logic there was that he'd rather keep Hickson and add Jamison rather than lose him for Stoudemire. Basically, he made the horribly wrong evaluation that the difference between Antoine Jamison and Amari Stoudemire wasn't big enough to let go of Hickson in a deal where he could keep him and just add something on top of him. And so, long story short, the Cavaliers never did get LeBron that second superstar in the first time he was there. And that, my friends, is what we're going to fix today. Now, there are a couple of rules we're going to play this game by. First off, only one superstar / player is being added to this 07 Cavs roster. This is not intended to be a rebuild video, and if we start adding a bench and whatnot, then it just kind of defeats the purpose because, well, they're no longer the 07 Cavs then. And the only other rule is that this scenario is going to be played out in today's league. I really have no accurate way to recreate the year 2006 since that was about 10 years ago and plenty of the players are missing, but that also makes this a lot more interesting. I think it'll be fun to use this year anyways because it'll be more challenging. Not only has the East improved this offseason, but the West still features two of the strongest teams we've seen in a while with the Warriors and Spurs. So it'll be fun to see what an 07 LeBron could do with one other superstar in today's league, especially since we know it's going to take an entire team just to stop him alone. So who did I pick for the scenario? Well, there was the thought of adding the young MJ in the game because both players played with very little talent at a young age, so it would have been fun just to see what those two could do and to see if they would be good enough to propel this roster past the Warriors. And then there was also the thought of getting Stoudemire and playing out the scenario that almost happened in 2010. But in the end, there really was only one guy that made total sense here. A guy that suffered nearly the exact same fate of dragging a poor roster to the finals against one of the better teams in history. Yeah, you probably guessed it by now, 2001 Allen Iverson. To be honest, this only made sense. Iverson is another player that was unguardable, and there is no shortage of shots to go around for him in this offense, being that LeBron is very unselfish, and there's literally nobody else on the roster to take the shots on a nightly basis. If this doesn't work out, however, we'll go down the list and see exactly what it would take for the 07 Cavs to win in today's league. So we've seen these two carry their own respective teams to an NBA Finals, only to be disappointed by reality. But could these two together carry the 07 Cavs to a championship in today's league where one of the most stacked rosters ever lies? Let's find out. So the Cavaliers start the season with some clear chemistry issues as the new trio of Rondo, Wade, and Butler simply overwhelms the Cavs, and James and Iverson have trouble figuring out who will dominate the ball. Cleveland loses by 23 on the road, and the LeBron-Wade rivalry is rekindled as the Bulls seem to have the upper hand from the start. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and the Cavs have recovered from the early blowout to win 5 of their next 7 games, in part because they played the Sixers twice in 1 week. But despite their come-up, the Bulls topped the power rankings for 2 straight weeks as preliminary talks of a Bulls-Cavs Eastern Conference Finals begins to surface. Not only are the Bulls doing well, but as expected, the San Antonio Spurs, boasting their new frontline of Gasol and Aldridge, is dominating as they roll through 6 straight wins, and the Warriors nearly matched that with 5 straight wins of their own. Through the first month of the young NBA season, the Cavs are very middle of the pack in terms of the entire league. They hold an average 10-6 record, good enough for only 4th in the Eastern Conference, and LeBron picks up one Player of the Week award as him and Iverson improve their on-court chemistry. However, they're clearly not on the same level as some of their counterparts, as the Spurs have now won 11 straight games, steamrolling the league. Fast forward 3 days after Christmas, and now the league is getting hot. First off, the Thunder led by Russell Westbrook throw their hat in the ring as they hit a 7-game win streak to join the Spurs and Warriors in the race for the West. However, the Warriors have put themselves head and shoulders above everybody else, winning 17 straight games with their new core of KD, Thompson, Curry, and Green, including a 22-point win over the Cavaliers on Christmas Day. Although the Cavaliers understandably fall short of competing with Golden State due to their new super team, James and Iverson overall begin to click, winning 9 of 11 total games in December, netting the second best record in the conference, including impressive victories over Boston, Oklahoma in overtime, and 3 straight blowouts over subpar teams, so there's no question they're a bit better than average by now. Fast forward again about 2.5 weeks into the new year on Martin Luther King Day, the Cavs have a chance to get a huge momentum boost nearly halfway into the season by busting the Warriors' win streak, which is now basically at 1 million. Here, The Warriors have now topped the power rankings for 10 weeks straight, have only lost 7 games, and basically show no signs of ever slowing down. However, Cleveland has only lost 9 games as well, as figuring out how to stop a young LeBron and Iverson at the same time has proved nearly impossible. But when you've got Curry, KD, Thompson, and Green on the same floor, you don't really need to stop anyone, they need to stop you. The Cavs received nearly all the help they could possibly ask for from the supporting cast, even Larry Hughes is the top scorer. However, they can do virtually nothing to stop the Warriors' offensive onslaught, and they are again blown out by 27, completing the sweep by Golden State for the year. So by this point there's no question, even if Cleveland does get to the finals and matches Golden State, there's probably no way they're going to win it. Just a few days later, to add on to that, the Cavs are blown out by the Los Angeles Clippers, marking their 41st game of the season, and now, talks are beginning that James and Iverson are in the worst place you can be. Good enough to beat all the weak to moderate teams in the NBA, but nowhere near good enough to beat the real contenders. On their 41st game, or halfway through the season, the Cavs are in first place in the East, but a bulk of their 12 losses have come from the Warriors, Spurs, Clippers, Bulls, Raptors, and Knicks. Literally about all the teams they possibly have to go through for a title. So the narrative now is that beating up on little teams is only going to get them so far. Looking at the standings, Cleveland's first place lead is far from safe, as only 3.5 games separate them from the Hawks, who are 4th seed. The West, however, tells a pretty similar story to last year's situation. The Warriors are 36-7, yet are still in jeopardy of losing their first spot to the Spurs. Behind them, really only the Thunder and Clippers pose threats, with every other roster being pretty inferior. A very encouraging sign for the Cavaliers at this point in the season is that James and Iverson did end up meshing. Both players are averaging 24 points a game and north of 6 assists, so even with 2 ball-dominant players, they're coming together to put this team on their backs. That was the idea of this after all, that putting just one other superstar with LeBron that could do anything could completely change the 07 Cavs' fortunes. So to wrap part 1 up, the retooled Cavaliers and Warriors sit atop their respective conferences at the midway point of the season, with the records of 29-12 and 36-7. It's pretty safe to assume that the Warriors won't be touching 73-9 here, but they're still dominating, and it's also safe to assume the Cavs won't be able to beat them in an NBA Finals matchup should that happen. James and Iverson are making for an incredible tag team that nobody can guard. However, they simply can't make up for the lack of talent around them, and the mismatches they're facing are making it near impossible to beat the top tier teams in the league. My prediction is that this Cavs team will probably make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they'll lose to the Bulls, who so far are the only other Eastern contender. What do you think? I'd love to hear your predictions, so leave it in the comments below, and you'll more than likely find out next video whether you were right or not.